Okay, thank you everyone for your patience. We'll soon start. I also had to get another technical resource to start the recording. I didn't have the rights to record, so the recording has started. I would only ask for housekeeping in a housekeeping issue that if you are not talking, maybe put your mic on mute. Okay, thank you. I'll just need someone to just confirm that they can see the screen that I am sharing, which has got an SC900 Microsoft Security Compliance slide.
I can confirm that I can see the screen you are sharing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so good morning again, everyone. I might pause from time to time as I'm also admitting some students as well who will continuously join the call as we proceed with this course content. Maybe just to start off with an introduction. So my name is Fortune Mwambati, and I'll be taking you through this module for today. So I basically have got 22 years of experience within the cyber security space, as well as audit space and fraud investigations. And I will be delivering this content to you. Hopefully you find this topic engaging. What I would like is that I would like this training not only to be one-sided, let's engage. If you've got any questions or if you want to share some of your experiences, you are more than welcome to chip in and share those as well. Okay, so what we will cover in this course, there's some prerequisites that you probably need in order to start this training, but if you don't have it, that's still okay. But the typical prerequisite that you would need is at least some basic understanding of Azure. That will make things easier for you to understand, especially when we get into the MS500 course, where we now have to start to do a bit of administration. Okay. I'll move on to the next slide. So in terms of the introduction, what we are seeing today in the world is that as more business data is being accessed from locations outside of the traditional corporate network, security and compliance is really becoming a concern. So what exactly do we mean by that? Outside the corporate network, if we take an example of the past 2 years where we are coming from with the pandemic, where people are working from home and have to access company resources from different locations. It then becomes extremely important that security and compliance is something that we really have to focus on, because the risk is actually increased. Now, to those organizations then understand how they can best protect their data, regardless of where it's accessed from, whether you are from home, accessing it from home, you are sitting at an airport, waiting to catch your next flight. Wherever you are from, the organization has a role to play to protect the organization's information. And what we're seeing now is that this sort of information now it's really moving away from your corporate data centers, meaning that this information would be sitting in a server which is located in one of the buildings which is owned by the company, but rather the information is sitting somewhere in the cloud. Or sometimes you find that this information is sitting in an hybrid manner, some of it in the corporate network, in a physical building owned by the company, and the other information sitting in the cloud. And then now, what adds into this is that not only do we have to comply to the organization's security policies and standards, because as you know, every organization will set its rules, right, in terms of how we access its information. But there's also regulations which are come from industry. And these regulations which are coming from the regulatory aspect, meaning that these are compliance requirements which are driven by the law of the land. So, for example, if you are living in South Africa, one of the things that, or the regulations that you would need to consider when you are protecting information is the POPIA Act, which is the protection of personal information. Now that is then to ensure that we protect and we ensure the privacy of personal information. Now, what this model is going to do for us here now is that we'll introduce some important security compliance concepts that you will need to learn about. Some of them, include, I've listed them here. So after this, we'll need to be able to describe exactly what is a shared responsibility and what is the defense in-depth security model. You need to be able to describe the zero trust model and be able to describe the concept of encryption and hashing. And then to close it off, we'll put together some description in terms of how we define basic compliance concepts. What I don't show here is that there's a few questions that I have at the end of this training, which will just be for us to test that we are understanding some of the content that we have touched on. The training in itself, I know that for today is booked for 2 hours. This module is quite short. The recommended time in terms of the Microsoft content that I've seen, and maybe towards the end, I'll show you exactly where I got this content from, so that yourselves as well, you can go and access these links and be able to access this information that I'm going to be taking you through. But the recommended time for this content is around 45 minutes. But we'll take it longer than that, because I'll be asking some questions as well at the end to make sure that the knowledge is being imparted as well. Okay, so that is the introduction. I don't know if there's any questions on this part so far. Otherwise, I can move on to the next slide. So, as I've indicated, the first area that we'll touch on is where we describe the shared responsibility and the defense in-depth security model. And so we'll start with describing the shared responsibility model. And this is a definition which we have from Microsoft. And it's important to understand this definition as it is, because if you intend on taking the exams, which I believe that should be the aspiration of most of you, this is the definition you should understand. So in organizations running only on-premise hardware and software, right? Maybe let me explain on-premises. I hope maybe this concept is not new to everyone. When we talk of on-premise hardware and software, we are talking about servers and software, as I've indicated earlier, which are sitting in the organization's building. So let's say, I mean, as IT think, we've got this address in Randburg. If we have got on-prem hardware and software, it means the actual servers and software are sitting at that address in Randburg. Now, what I'm saying is that the organization then is 100% responsible for implementing security and compliance. And of course, that would be the expectation, because if the hardware and software is sitting in your organization, let's say it's sitting in your house, you would be the one that is responsible to implement security and compliance, right? Because it's in your house, it's in your address, you've got access to the key. Now, with the cloud-based services, that responsibility now, it kind of shifts a bit. And then that's where this concept now of shared between the customer and the cloud provider. Now, when we talk of the cloud-based services, remember for the on-prem, we're saying the servers are sitting in a specific address that you own. You've got the key, you can get in and out anytime you want. On the cloud-based services, this hardware and software could be sitting anywhere in the world. In fact, in most instances, unless you specifically ask, you might find that you might not even know where your servers are actually hosted. Are they hosted in Cape Town? Are they hosted in Durban? Are they hosted in France? Are they hosted in the US, for example? So then in that case, when we talk about cloud-based services, the responsibility is then shared between the customer and the provider and the cloud provider. Now, when you talk of cloud providers, there are many cloud providers, and maybe that is a homework that you can go and just do some research on, just to build on some of this knowledge. But in the context of this Microsoft course, the cloud provider in this case would be the Microsoft Cloud, because that is where they will be hosting your Office 365, where your Azure will be sitting. But there are other cloud providers. You've got IBM Clouds, just to name a few. There's many clouds out there. It all depends on what services or hardware you want to procure, which will drive you to what cloud provider you want to choose. But in the contents of this course, because it's a Microsoft course, we will focus on the Microsoft Cloud. So the shared responsibility model identifies which security tasks are handled by the cloud provider and which security tasks are handled by you. You being the customer, or you being the IT administrator of that organization, or the security office of that organization, then those will be the tasks that you would then have to ensure that you are responsible for. Now, these responsibilities or these tasks, they are not really set in stone, but they vary. And they vary depending on where the workload is hosted, or where the cloud services is hosted, or what sort of services you're consuming from that cloud. Now, there's various cloud options there. Some of it is you can have software as a service, right? And so instead of having a software that is installed on every user's PC, that software is sitting in the cloud, and those users use that software, then that would be something that we call software as a service. Then there's also a platform as a service. By platform, this could be, I just want to find a very good example of what we can say platform is. Maybe a specific Microsoft financial services platform that is hosted in the cloud. That would be a platform that your organization would be accessing. You could have an infrastructure as a service. That means you have got a server which is sitting on the cloud, and then it's up to you to decide what you want to do with that infrastructure or with that server. You can decide what sort of software to install. You can decide what sort of services that server should run, which will be consumed by your users. Then there's the on-premises data center. Now, the on-premises data center. So this is basically we've got a question, Bakang.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I see you've got your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Can I go? Okay. Okay. Can you just try to explain this on a broader scale, like your software as a service or platform, like from an audit perspective, in terms of, I'd like to think that infrastructure like this, it's there basically just to make services cost effective for clients. You understand? So in terms of licensing, instead of having like 10 machines running the same software, we can have it software as a service sitting on the cloud somewhere. But now, do you just buy one license and then you just use just the one license instead of 10 for the 10 machines, like in terms of an audit perspective? I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, you are making sense. For the scope of this course and understand where you're coming from. So the decision that you would need to take in terms of choosing what sort of options that you would need to go for, or at least some of the benefits as some of them you have mentioned, the licensing aspect. But remember, as far as licensing, that will dependent on the software that you are subscribing to as a service. So, for example, if you are subscribing to, say, for example, to an IT service desk, that license cost would be planned and would be different from a license, say, for example, for a client relation management system. And their licensing models would be different. Some licenses will say it's one license per 10 users. Some license will be it's one license per user. But from a security point of view, we are not dealing with the licenses, because the licenses is a business decision. We can, as a security, recommend that for the business to save costs, why don't you move away from the on-prem solutions? Because now you have got the added burden of having to make sure that security and compliance, you implement that fully. And it means that you have to have the skills to be able to do that if your whole infrastructure is actually on-prem. Now, as security people, and I think now we're really going beyond the scope of this course, but as the security experts, and you want to then draw the cost-benefit analysis. That is what you would say it. You would then put together a cost-benefit analysis to say, what is the cost of me securing this environment? If it's on premises, then you would look at the skills that you would need. You would need to look at the licenses. Mind you, the licenses when things are actually on premises, they are a lot more expensive than when they're sitting on the cloud, right? Because in the cloud, the environments are almost shared. So then you're worried about licenses, you're worried about the skills, and you are worried about the backup as well. Because if it's sitting on your location, if you have got load shedding, that means your whole infrastructure is down. But if it's sitting in the cloud provider already has got all those controls put in place. So I think that questions they are also challenging me as well. But remember, this course is pretty much an entry-level course into implementing security and compliance on the Microsoft platforms. There are other more advanced courses like your Security Plus, which is more generic, like your CISSPs, etc. So the shared responsibility, that model that we're talking about here, and you will see in the slides that follow. The purpose of this is to only make it clear what you are responsible of doing. So that is what you need to understand, to say that we've got all these platforms. What should I expect myself to do as the organization, and what should I expect the cloud provider to be doing? I hope I've answered your questions. If not fully, I think it will become clear as we move on to the next slide. So,
Krista.
Okay, so just bear in mind all of this. Then remember we talked about those platforms, right? In this one now, we really now start to drill down into the shared responsibility model. And when it comes to the exams, what they are really looking for is for you to know where the responsibility lies, right? So a software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, or on-premise, this top part means that information and data, devices, that means your cell phones, your laptops, your computers, and accounts and identities, that will always be the responsibility of the customer. Meaning that you, as a security administrator, that is, you can shy away from this responsibility. And the reason why you can't shy away from this responsibility is because the information and the data that is being processed across all these models, across the software, platform, infrastructure, and prem, the information and the data belongs to the organization. So that means it is always going to be your responsibility. Again, the devices which are processing the information and processing the data, that will always be your responsibility to ensure that you implement security and compliance on the devices. Then in terms of who, which accounts, which identities, so who has got access to these devices to access this information and this data, again, it will always be your responsibility to say that The information that I have, I must know which devices are accessing them. I must know who is accessing them. So that is always going to be your responsibility. And when you sit the exams, that is what you need to understand. They might try to trick you, but just understand that information is and data is always owned by the organization or the customer, and the devices are owned by the customer, and the accounts are the identities are the employees of the customer, and therefore that is also managed by the customer or by you as a security person of the organization. Okay, then when it starts to shift to identity and directory in infrastructure, then we start to see that the responsibility now starts to vary. And the reason it varies is because of situations. So for the software as a service, the in identity and the directory infrastructure, it could be shared. That means that this is now shared between Microsoft and shared between the customer. That means you have got a role to play in terms of implementing security and ensuring compliance, and Microsoft also has got a role to play as well. Now, and then of course infrastructure, because the infrastructure is yours, and if it's hosted on-prem, the customer will be responsible for implementing security and ensuring compliance. We see the same for applications, and network controls. We see that is also a shared, or well, at least for software as a service, and at least for software as a service, that is still sitting with Microsoft. But for platform as a service, we can see that, let me just bring my pointer. We can see that is shared between the customer and Microsoft. So overall, this view is really to guide you to know what is it that am I supposed to, or what is it that is expected from me as an organization, and what is it that I can expect Microsoft to do. Now, when we come to the more advanced courses, which Trevor will be taking us next week sometime, then we start to see, yes, these responsibilities that we have, how do we implement them? And that's when we'll be going on to Office 365 and start implementing these things. Start seeing how do we implement security and compliance on the information and the data. How do we set specific security and compliance for and enforce them on the mobile devices and your laptops? How do we create and manage accounts and identities? So all this will be covered in the MS 500 course. But for the purpose of this, is just to understand that this is when we say a shared responsibility model, you have to understand that there are specific responsibilities which are here on the left, and according to either software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, there are certain tasks that you as a customer would need to do, and there's certain things that you should be expecting from Microsoft. Now, there's a lot of technical stuff that goes on here as well, and I don't want to go into detail because it's out of the scope of this course. But you know, when you talk of applications, you need to understand what sort of ports some applications are working on. For example, if you are transferring files, some applications which transfer files will be with what we call FTP, meaning that it will be working on port 20 or port 21. And then there is network controls that you can put in place, and so there's a lot of technical stuff that is happening here, but let us not go through the technical stuff, because the purpose of this course, what you need to understand is that there are responsibilities which are shared between Microsoft and the customers, and this is the matrix that is used. Okay, and of course, as you move down to the bottom, then you can see that the responsibility then transfers to the cloud providers, because the servers, if they're sitting on the cloud, that means they control the operating system. They have got the physical host, they've got the physical networks, they've got the data centers. So you see that responsibility is shifting then to the cloud provider. Where it will still remain, it is when you've got on-premise. When you are on-premise, everything you will need to do, meaning that the skills that you have to have, you need to have people that can do all of this stuff and understand all these technical implications. Okay, I'll move on to the next slide, but happy to take any questions if there are any. Okay, so I think now this is just more expanding. We've got David with a question. David, please feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Okay, my question is, which model works for the best model works for the company between the platform as a provider and other providers like the infrastructure. So basically, which model works best for a certain company, which is small, yeah, between all the four ones.
Okay, so there is no clear answer to that question, but there are some guiding principles. Okay, so the first one I would say is that if the organization is large enough to have a data center that can host servers, and they have got the required resources to maintain those servers. And when I say required resources, we're talking about the cooling. So firstly, if you've got servers and you're talking about on-premise solutions, that means you must have some air cons that are running 24/7 to keep that environment cool so that your servers don't overheat. It means that you must have proper service level agreements with your vendors. In case one of your hard drive blows, you need to be able to have someone bring in that other hard drive and actually copy that and be up and running in no time at all. It also means that for the on-prem, as you see, everything you will need to do yourself, you will need to employ a skill, right? And this security skill that will be required to do this thing will be very, I would say very expensive, but that person will come at a cost depending on their experience, right? And knowing that there's a skills shortage in the country, you will have to take this decision very clearly as if you want to go through this route, right? But of course, now if you're looking at a small business where there's just 5 employees or 2 employees, you know, their business operation is very small. They don't rely on IT that much. If their server is down for a day or 2, it's fine. They can pick up the phone and call people and still have a business running. Then you can still have on-prem, because you don't really, your business does not really depend heavily on the on-prem solution. Now, in terms of cost, this on-prem solution would be the costly of all of them. Also because every couple of years, the hardware that you have will reach end of support. You will find yourself, you have to buy some servers and you need to upgrade, etc. But as you move to the left, or rather, let's say everything to the left is to some degree cheaper than having this on-prem, or it can be cheaper in the long term, let's put it that way. Because remember, on the on-prem, it means that whatever you buy, the software, the licenses, you are going to keep. But what is on the left, the licensing is normally subscription based, meaning that you will be paying for license fees for the lifetime of the business. So meaning that in the long run, the cost for this would be higher, because you will always pay for these license fees. Whereas on the on-prem, you buy the licenses once and then you are done. Only when you want to upgrade can you buy additional licenses. Of course, the advantage with everything on the left is that you don't have to worry about the skill on some of these things. Microsoft have got. Yes, the training is being recorded. And if you are not asking a direct question, please go on mute. Okay, so as we move to the left, and where we start to leverage on the competencies of the Microsoft staff, then we do not worry about the skills that we have, because Microsoft have got suitably trained people on their products to help with identity and directory infrastructure and applications, well, at least for software as a service and partly on platform as a service. So to summarize, or maybe to get back to your question, how do you decide which option to go for? The decision will never is in most cases. IT can influence, but it should always be a business decision. As an IT person, the IT managers typically would take a proposal to the business and say that these is the cost benefit analysis of going on-prem, of doing this and this and this, and they will outline the capital outlay to say that in the next 5-10 years on-premise, this is what we're going to spend, and we're going to spend it on this and this and this, on this is what we're going to spend, and the business then takes a decision. Because remember, IT is there to support the business, right? Personally, depending also on what you want to put on the cloud. So if you want to consume software, then software as a service would be what you want. If you want, infrastructure where you have a server and you install whatever you want, then maybe the infrastructure would be, what you need. So there's no clear and cut, fact, in terms of this, you will need to do cost-benefit analysis and see what your organization budget is. And then the business will take a decision in terms of how much money they have and where they'll want to invest it. Your job is to know your job is to know what your responsibility will be, depending on what model, or depending on what is actually chosen, whether it's software, platform, infrastructure, on-prem. Your job is, as a security expert, is to know, oh, the company chose software as a service. So software as a service, it means I need to only worry about information and data, devices, and account and identities. The company decided to do everything on-prem, meaning that I have to worry about all of these things. Okay, hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Now, and maybe now this definition as well will also talk into your question as well as we continue to just describe this further. So the on-premise data centers, in an on-premise data center, you have responsibility for everything, right? It's clear. For everything from security to encrypting sensitive data, everything you're going to have to do. Infrastructure as a service, of all cloud services, IaaS requires the most management by the cloud customer. So yeah, out of all of these ones, that means this is the one where you would be doing the most of the work. With infrastructure as a service, we are using the cloud providers' computing infrastructure. The cloud customer isn't responsible for the physical components, such as computers, the network, or physical security of the data center. However, the cloud customer still has a responsibility for software components, such as operating system, network controls, application, and protecting the data. So here you can now start to see when we dig deep to see what sort of the things you would be responsible for. And here they're making it clear that operating system, networks, controls, applications, and protecting data. Now, platform as this provides an environment. So it provides an environment for a building, testing, and deploying software. The goal for platform as a service is to help you create an application quickly without managing the underlying infrastructure. With platform as a service, the cloud provider is the hardware, operating system, and the customer is responsible for application and data. So you can see when you move to platform, you are only responsible for two parts, application and data. Whereas infrastructure as a service, you are dealing with operating system, network controls, applications, and protecting the data. So maybe as you look at this, you will also then, it can inform your the decision to say which one are we going to choose for, which one are we going to choose would be dependent on the skills that we have. You could say, oh, we've got the skills to do network controls, applications, maybe let's do this. But oh, we don't have limited skills, and we basically just need a platform because we are just developing software and applications. Maybe let's just worry about applications and data. Then you'll go to platform as a service. Okay, then software as a service. So this is hosted and managed by the cloud provider. For the customer, it's usually licensed through a monthly or annual subscription. Okay, Microsoft 365, Skype, and Dynamics CRM Online are example of software as a service, and SaaS requires the least amount of management by the cloud customer. the cloud provider is responsible for managing everything except data, devices, accounts, and identities. Those will always be something that will be for the organization to manage. Then for all cloud deployment types, meaning that for what we've mentioned previously, the cloud customer owns the data and identities. You have a responsibility for protecting the security of your data and identities and on-premise resources. And then in summary, responsibilities will always be retained by the customer organizations. Remember, I already talked about this to say that the organization will always own the information, will always own the data. It will also own the devices which are processing the information and the data, and it will be the organization that will define which accounts and identities can access these mobile devices and PCs, and subsequently the information and data, meaning that this part will always be something that we will need to have a look at. Now, the benefits of the shared responsibilities that the organizations are clear about their responsibilities and those of the cloud provider. And I think you can all agree with me that, with that matrix that we showed, it is clear who is doing what. You are clear in terms of what responsibilities lie with you and what responsibility lies with the cloud provider. Okay. Then I'll go to the next one. Now we start to define. So remember, in this module, we're covering 4 topics. This is now the second topic that we're moving into, where we're now going to describe defense in depth. Okay, so we are now moving away from the shared responsibility model. Okay, and I hope everything was clear as far as the shared responsibility model. Now, describe the defense in depth. Maybe without first looking at these slides, let me just give you an analogy. In your house, in your main bed, you have got a safe. Your safe has got $1 million US, right? You want to protect that $1 million. How you would apply defense in depth in that environment of your home, just to describe it loosely, is that one, if you are lucky and your house is in a gated estate, that means people can't just come into your estate. They have to call you before they come in and try to steal your safe. That means they have to maybe subdue the guards at the main gates before they get in. That is the first layer. Then maybe let's assume they are in. When they come to your house, you have got an electric fence. That is another layer. You've got an electric fence that the intruders have to worry about. Say they can disarm the electric fence. They get to the door or the windows. There is some burglar bars or meshed nets or whatever you call it. That means they can't just break a window and come in. They have to worry about the burglar bars and gaining access. That is, another layer. Then there is also an alarm system. When they trigger and break, the alarm will go. ADT will come. Then that is another layer. Then suppose they overcome that. Then they come in. Every room leading to your main bedroom is locked. Now they have to break every single lock, every door. that means you are slowing down the intruder now, right? Then they get to the main room and break that door, and then they're greeted with the safe with a combination. That is another layer. So what I've just explained now is defense in depth in a kind of layman's term, where we are defending our prized assets in layers. Okay. Now let's look at the definition we have here. Defense in depth uses a layered approach to security. Rather than relying on a single parameter, a defense in depth strategy uses a series of mechanisms to slow the advance of an attack. Each layer provides protection so that if one layer is breached, a subsequent layer will prevent an attacker gaining unauthorized access. So it's exactly what I talked about. Now, in the IT space, of course, now we will talk about Windows and barbed wires and all those things now, right? We will now introduce some sort of terminology that we can use to define this the defense in depth, right? We've got physical security, right? Physical security in this sense, it will still be the guard, right? So let's say you've got the on-prem solution at your address, you have got the guards that are standing there. Those guards are controlling and limiting access to the data center, and only authorized personnel are allowed. Maybe you've got a magnetic card that is issued by your company. You have to swipe it before you get into the data center. That is a layer, right? Then there is identity and access, right? So security controls such as multi-factor authentication or conditional-based access to control access to infrastructure and change control. What this basically means is that now, logically, you want to break into software or a service or an application, whatever the case is. There will be, typically, or in the olden days, we were quite familiar with single factor, which is just your password. You put in your password and you are in. But because the threat landscape has changed, now there is multi-factor authentication. And we see this now typically in the banking environment as well, where when you log into when you do payments, etc., they also send you an OTP, which is a one-time PIN. So that, and you take that one-time PIN and you put it on your banking app, then you can process that. That is another layer of doing your multi-factor authentication. In the case of Microsoft, the multi-factor authentication that they use for a tool called Microsoft Authenticator, that when you are logging on to a specific, send a message to your cell phone, and you'll have to approve access on your cell phone. Meaning that unless the intruder has got your cell phone, they can't be able to gain access. So that is the additional layer of security that is being addressed. Then here they also talk about conditional-based access, right? You can implement conditional-based access. And what exactly is this? Say, for example, we've got a payroll system, for example, and the payroll system example where you can pay people salaries or whatever the case, or transfer monies, whatever the case is. And you can say that, okay, this process we only do Monday to Friday between 8 to 5. The conditional-based access would be that if anyone tries to process those transactions on a weekend, it must not allow it. That is another layer of security. And sometimes in a practical world, we see that in a lot of financial controls, or at least when we know that people are only allowed to work 8 to 5, then we only allow condition-based access controls, only limiting them to do certain things only in those hours. Then there is the parameter. Okay, so the parameter now we are talking about now in the instance of the analogy parameter, we talked about the fence, which was the electric fence, right? Now, in this case, the parameter, because remember, in some of these things you can't really see, it's logical, it's devices. Yeah, security of your corporate network would include distributed denial of service protection to filter large-scale attacks before they can cause a denial of service. For users. Okay, maybe let me. Does anyone understand or know what is a distributed denial of service is? Maybe they can share while I drink some water just to test your knowledge.
Yes.
Okay, Bakang, what is a distributed denial of service?
It's basically just like your virus or your it's a denial of service. You understand? It denies a user a particular service. You know, you have different types of DDoS. You know, you have ransomware, where you know a hacker is there to extort like money or something. They take information. You know. With the intention to extort money, you know, there's different kinds of DDoSs.
Okay, so thank you for that, Bakang. Anyone wants to try? Very good answer, by the way. Okay, so maybe just to add on to that, so I mean, a distributed a denial of services. Any organization has got a specific load that they can take, right? Just look at it as a freeway. You have got your original roads. We have got one lane going up, one lane going down, or you've got a freeway where there's 4 lanes, which is going in a single direction. That is the bandwidth that an organization can take. Right now, in this distributed denial of service, what the attackers do now is they compromise many computers around the world. Let's say they compromise 1,000 computers or 500,000 computers, and they all tell those computers around the world to say, target this IP address, target that building. That means all of a sudden now you've got 500,000 computer traffic coming down your single lane. That is now going to mean that your road or your traffic to your organization is congested. It will then mean that legitimate users who want to access your services can't access because of the congestion. And this layer of security is that then companies implement controls like anti-DDoS, things that can stop this from actually happening. And Microsoft also implements this protection as well. Okay. Then for network security, network security such as network segmentation and network access controls to limit communication between resources. So what this basically means is that it's like in the instances of the house. When we say segmentation, you just hold on a minute. Okay. Just 1 minute. So I just want to get rid of some background noise on my side because we're recording this training. Okay, I'm sorry about that. So as far as network security is concerned, I'm going to use the example of the house. So when we talk of segmentation, if the house is or at least all the rooms of the house are open, it means there's no segmentation. It means everyone can go from one room to the other easily. Now, with network segmentation, it means that every server or every department is segmented, meaning that there's controls that stop you from accessing, let's say, the marketing servers, and there's also controls stopping you from accessing the HR servers, and there's controls stopping you from accessing the finance server. So the segmentation is important so that we continue to defend our resources in depth. Okay, now the compute layer, this is security such as securing access to virtual machines, either on premise or in the cloud by closing certain ports. Okay, so this basically means what? Every application that is running on the environment works on a specific port. What I had mentioned earlier on was to say that if an application is transferring files, it would use FTP, and that protocol is port 21. So if you want to continue to block and say you don't want hackers to get into my box and steal files, you can look at blocking that port. So then you are continuing to defend in depth. Then there is application layer security, which is to ensure applications are secure, free from security vulnerabilities. So there is always going to be vulnerabilities which are published, and typically what happens is you will normally do vulnerability scans on a regular basis. So you would scan your servers to see what are the weaknesses. Then you would follow the recommendation which is given by the vulnerability scanner. So the vulnerability scanner would say that, okay, here you've got a problem where you are using Telnet, and they'll tell you that the problem with using Telnet is that the transfer of data is not secure. And they will say, please consider disabling Telnet and instead use SSH. So those are sort of vulnerability scanners that you periodically need to do so that you continually evolve and protect your security in depth. Then there's the data. Now you have hit the data because people want to steal the data, right? They are going through the physical layer, identity access, the parameter, the network, compute application, only to get to the data, because the data is what is meaningful for them. What can they do with this data? They can sell it in the dark web and make money. They can encrypt it with a ransomware and tell you that if you want to decrypt it, you must pay them money, or they can gain competitive advantage if they're working for a competition of yours. So this is what you are ultimately protecting the data. And in this layer, some of the controls that you can include there would be how do we manage this access, and we can also do encryption to protect this data. So that will be defense in depth. Okay. Any questions on this? I hope I was able to clearly explain why we have this concept of defense in depth, which is basically, if we go back to the definition, it is the use of a layered approach to security rather than relying on a single parameter. A defense in-depth strategy uses a series of mechanisms to slow the advance of an attack. And each layer provides protection so that if one layer is breached, a subsequent layer will prevent an attacker getting unauthorized access to the data, which is the case. So if a person can break into your building, they still need to somehow have identity and access. And if they do that, they still have to see how they can get maybe into the parameter, into the network, into the compute, into the application, and to the data. Okay. Now, this is just a further illustration in a graphical view of the defense in depth, where we talked of physical security, then identity and access, the parameter, the network, compute, and ultimately through the application, the data. Okay. Now, any questions so far? How are we doing for time? Okay. So with this defense in-depth strategy that we have just talked about, there are a few things that we want to achieve. Yes, we want to have these mechanisms to slow the advance of an attack. But while we're doing this, we want to also ensure three things, right? We want to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. Okay, so if you're ever going to go and do any other security course, this you have to know: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. They call it the triad of security: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Maybe just to test some quick knowledge out there. What do you understand by, let's say, integrity? Anyone wants to try? Okay, maybe the easier one, availability. Anyone wants to try? Remember, this all has to do with the data. We're protecting data. We want to ensure that the data is confidential, that there's confidentiality in the data, there's integrity, and the data is available all the time when we need it. If there's a DDoS, as there's a denial of service, it affects our availability. Then we do not have availability. If the attacker breaks into our defense in depth and gets to our data, then our data, there's no longer confidentiality because the data is leaked. If the data is breached and there's no longer confidentiality, we do not know exactly what the attackers have changed on the data. So we really can't, we're not sure, we can't rely. So the integrity of the data is also impacted, right? So let's just see what the definitions are. Let's go to the next one. Confidentiality, right? It refers to the need to keep confidential sensitive data such as computer information, passwords, or financial data. You can encrypt the data to keep it confidential, right? So meaning that when they break in, if the data is encrypted, they still can't view the data, so it's still confidential. But then you also need to keep the encryption keys confidential, right? So what is the use of locking your house if you are going to leave the keys of your house under the mat or on the door, where anyone can access the keys and get in and affect confidentiality? Okay, confidentiality is the most visible part of security. We can clearly see need for sensitive data, keys, passwords, and other secrets to be kept confidential. Okay, integrity refers to keeping data or messages correct, right? Because if your confidentiality is affected, how do we know that this is correct? When you send an email message, you want to be sure that the message received is the same as the message you sent, so that it's not altered along the way. When you store data in a database, you want to be sure that the data you retrieve is the same as the data you stored. Encrypting data keeps it confidential, but you must then be able to decrypt it so that it's the same as before it was encrypted. Integrity is about having confidence that the data has not been tampered with or altered with. Okay, that alludes to the point which I mentioned, that when talk of integrity is how do you know that the data is not being changed? Availability refers to making the data available to those who need it when they need it. It's important to the organization to keep customer data secure, but at the same time, it must also be available to employees who deal with customers. While it might be more secure to store the data in an encrypted format, employees need access to decrypted data. Okay, and I think the last part here, while the goal of cybersecurity strategy are to preserve the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of systems, networks, applications, and data, it's the goal of the cyber criminals, right, to disrupt these goals. We are always working against the cyber criminals. So then Microsoft portfolio includes solutions and technologies that would help us as organizations to deliver on the goals to ensure CIA tried. That's the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Okay, then we're moving to the third part of what we need to learn to describe, and I don't know if there's any with the previous part regarding defense in depth before we move to defining or describing the zero trust model. Okay, so the zero trust model, I mean, it says it by itself, zero trust. That means you don't trust anyone. You don't trust your family members. You don't trust your friends. There's no trust here, right? But it's still in the same organization. It's called a zero trust. But what does it translate to? Let's look at the definition. Zero trust assumes everything is on an open and untrusted network, right? Even resources behind firewalls or corporate network, the zero trust model operates on the principle of trust no one, verify everything. So if we can take an example of the house, the analogy of the house, and we say we're implementing zero trust in your house. In your house, you have got family members of 6 people living. Each one has got their own room. Each one in their own room is locked inside their room. When the person in room A wants to go and talk to the person in room B, they will unlock their door. They'll go to room B and they will knock, and the person in room B will ask, who are you? Even when they know that it's probably someone in our house. I mean, we trust this person, but we'll still be asking, who are you? And then say, I mean, it's me, your son. Oh, okay. So what do you want? So we trust no one and we'll verify everything. That is what the zero trust model is. Okay. And attackers' ability to bypass conventional access control is ending an illusion that traditional security strategies is sufficient. So because of the how attackers have always been able to bypass security controls, this is why now there's this concept, or at least there's this way of protecting data called zero trust model where you trust no one and verify everything. By no longer trusting the integrity of the corporate network, security is strengthened. So by now saying that, yeah, even if this network is ours, hey, we do not trust it. We are now strengthening the security because we are verifying everything that is actually happening. Then, I mean, in practice, it basically means that we no longer assume that the password is sufficient. Yes, you might have a password to validate a user, but add multi-factor authentication to provide additional checks instead of granting access to all devices on the corporate network. Users are allowed access only to specific applications or the data that they need. There's a video here that I wanted to watch. It's basically a 2-minute video. I'm not going to play it now. I think what I can do is maybe just share it on the link. In fact, if you go onto the link of the training and the information that I've taken you through, you will be able to play this video on your own time. But this video just basically, you know, it illustrates this zero trust model. It's just one way of looking at the concept as well. I'm just afraid of playing this video because I'm not sure if the sound is going to come out. Okay. Now, there are some guiding principles towards this zero trust model. Okay, and there's 3 principles which underpin how security is actually implemented. And these are verify explicitly. Okay, meaning that we really have to make sure this person is who they say they are. Once we've verified explicitly that this is who they say they are, then we give them least privileged access. It doesn't mean that because we know who you are now, we give you access to everything. We give you least privileged access. And we always assume there's a breach. We always assume that, well, there's a compromise happening. Okay, now that this here just, just describes that. Verify explicitly, always authenticate and authorize based on the available data points, including user identity, location, device, service or workload or data classification and anomalies. Okay, now this one is actually interesting because in some of these platforms, when they talk of location, where you are verifying by location, when you sign into some of these apps, it will ask you, might send you a notification. Someone tried to log on to your account, but this person is sitting, in Germany. You know, that means that it's trying to verify explicitly. And before it grants that access, it wants you to confirm is, are you sure this location is correct for us to grant this access? Or sometimes there's actually anomalies to say that we actually know you to access this environment during 8 to 5, but now someone is accessing this thing now at 12 midnight. Should we grant this access? So this is the verify explicitly. Now, once the access is granted, we still are going to assign least privileged access. What does it mean? Limit the user access with just in time and just enough access. This is a risk-based adaptive policy and data protection to protect both data and productivity. We're always going to assume this is a breach. Segment access by network. Users, devices, and applications. Use encryption to protect data and analytics to get visibility and to detect threat and improve your security. Now, when we start doing the MS500 course of actually configuring these things, you will then see how some of these things can actually be configured or what does it mean when we are in the Office 365 environment or Azure environment when we start doing that. Okay, describe the zero. Okay, so we just in continuation in the zero trust model, all elements work together to provide end-to-end security. Okay, these 6 elements are the foundational pillars of zero trust model. So we talked about the 3 principles. Now we're talking about the pillars. Now, when we talk about the pillars, the 6 of them, there's identity, devices, application, data, infrastructure. In terms of identities, so this may be users, it may be services, or it may be devices. When an identity attempts to access a resource, it must be verified with a strong authentication and follow the least privilege access principle. You see, they're also assigning the pillars to some of the principles we talked about. Then devices create a large attack surface as data flows from devices to on-premise workloads and the cloud. So here the devices are they're talking about your cell phones, which are accessing the data, your laptops and computers. They're saying they create a large attack surface because this is the way that we can breach. Because the data is flowing from these devices to the on-prem solution, if you have on-prem, or to the cloud. So therefore, monitoring device for health and compliance is an important aspect of security. So when we have these laptops and cell phones, we need to be able to monitor any security violations on those devices. The applications are the way that the data is consumed. So the data is presented through an application, right? For example, this presentation now, which I'm showing you this data, but the application that is presenting this data is PowerPoint. So the data is presented through applications, right? And depending on what application it display whatever data. So this includes discovering all applications being used, sometimes called shadow IT, because not all applications are managed centrally. So what it means that here is where it is important to understand what applications are being used within an organization. And what is even more important is that you need to consider that not all applications could be managed centrally. There could be other applications which the users have installed on their own laptops, which could then create some backdoors into your on-prem workloads or into the cloud environment. Right? The pillars, this pillar also includes managing permissions and access, right? So by defining access, we'll be managing this pillar. In terms of data should be classified, labeled, encrypted based on its attributes. Security efforts are ultimately about protecting data and ensuring it remains safe when it leaves devices, applications, infrastructure, and networks that the organization controls. Some examples of the classifications, you might have seen some companies classify the data as confidential. Some classify it as public. Some classify this as, especially as far as government is concerned, they can classify some data as top secret. But each of those classification, it informs what security effort we should put into protecting the data. So, for example, if the data, is public, we wouldn't spend a lot of effort protecting the data as if the data is top secret, meaning that it's a government related data. Maybe it is about a spread of an upcoming virus that is going to come, and then the government is now saying that this is top secret. We can't unleash this out information because it's going to cause a lot of panic, etc. We can't protect the information the same way. So in terms of data, that's why they say it should be classified, labeled, and encrypted based on its attributes. And security efforts are ultimately about protecting data and ensuring it remains safe when it leaves, etc. So when we get to infrastructure, whether on premises or on the cloud, this all represents a threat vector. So whether it's on-prem or in the thread or the cloud, there is always a threat vector. So there's a way that you should be thinking in terms of to improve the security. You have to assess for version configuration and just make sure that you have got just-in-time access, and use telemetry to detect attacks and anomalies, meaning that you should actually have ways to monitor the logs and proactively detect attacks and anomalies so that you can block those as and when they happen. This allows you to automatically, exactly as I said, block or flag risky behavior and take proactive actions. Okay, remember these are the pillars, right, which are supporting those three principles. Right? So in terms of network, networks should be segmented, including deeper in network micro-segmentation, also real-time threat protection and end-to-end encryption, monitoring, and analytics should be employed. I think this is clear. We talked about the segmentation of networks, that not everything should just be open. Now here they're even adding that you need to have deeper in-network micro-segmentation, almost like having a room in a room and locked again. Okay, this is just a graphical representation of the zero trust model. Remember, it says, trust no one, verify everything. We have got the three principles, which is the foundations, which are anchoring the pillars. We verify explicitly. We only give least privilege access, and we are always assuming there's a breach. And all of these principles are supporting these pillars: identities, and these identities could be user accounts, it could be computer accounts. Then we've got devices, we've got applications, and data, infrastructure, and networks. We are verifying explicitly who has got access to identities, giving them these privileges, assuming that there's a breach, and we're applying all these principles throughout these pillars. Now, the security strategy that employs the three principles of zero trust model across 6 foundational pillars helps companies deliver and enforce security across their organization. Okay, that is a zero trust model. Then we can then move to encryption. Okay. Any question maybe on the zero trust, or we can go through the encryption? Okay, now when we talk about the encryption, now we are now getting the data, right? And remember, when we talk about the integrity, I mean, when we talk about encryption and hashing, we are now dealing with the confidentiality of the information. So to say that when the hacker has breached all those layers, if you've got encryption, you can still have confidentiality of this information, right? And we say one way to mitigate against common cybersecurity threat is to encrypt sensitive data or valuable data. Encryption is the process of making data unreadable and usable and unusable to unauthorized viewers. So your hackers won't be able to view the data. To use or read encrypted data, it must be decrypted, which requires the use of a secret key. Right. Now, there are two top-level types of encryption. There's symmetric and there's asymmetric encryption. Right? Symmetric encryption, symmetric encryption, sorry, uses the same key to encrypt and decrypt the data. Uses the same key to encrypt and decrypt the data. So, for example, if I am sending a message to Yoliswa, who's here on the call, and I'm using a symmetric key, I will need to tell Yoliswa, and I might maybe call her on the phone or something and say, Yoliswa, I'm sending you some data. The shared key, which we'll use to decrypt the key, is Zama. Zama is also here on the call, right? So I will take this information and say this information here is, I love cybersecurity. And then I will use symmetric encryption, and I will encrypt that text which says I love security with the shared key, which I communicated to Yoliswa, called Zama. Remember, we said our shared key is Zama because I called Yoliswa and I told you that we're going to use this key called Zama. Now, once I encrypt that message with the shared key, which I already shared with Yoliswa on the phone, that message now, it no longer reads as I love cybersecurity. Now it is just X and Y's and X's. You can't really see what's going on. Then it goes through to Yoliswa. Then Yoliswa will then say, oh, Fortune communicated the shared key with me. And he said the shared key is Zama. He will then, she will then, I don't know if Yoliswa is a he or a she, sorry, pardon me. But Yoliswa will then decrypt the information with the shared key of Zama. And then when she decrypts, or he or she, when she decrypts that information, then she'll be able to translate those X's and whatever letters were there into the text which I'd sent originally, which is I love cybersecurity. Then she will be happy because she also loves cybersecurity, and she will encrypt again and send back to me, and she will say, me too. Then we are all happy, for example. I hope that is clear, but the concept there of a symmetric encryption is that we are using shared keys, right? I'm telling the person who's going to receive the information what key I have used to encrypt the message. Then the next part is the asymmetric encryption, right? Which uses a public key and a private key pair. Either key can encrypt data, but a single key can't be used to decrypt and encrypt data. To decrypt, you need a paired key. Asymmetric encryption is used for things accessing sites or internet using HTTPS protocols and electronic data signing solution. Encryption may protect data at rest or in transit, right? Okay, so I'll come back to this last part. So let's maybe come to this asymmetric thing. Okay. There is a public key, right? And what you need to understand here by public is that a public key is known by everyone. That's why it's called public, right? A private key is known only by yourself, right? Okay, that is what you must first understand. Now, I'm sending the very same message now. I'm to Yoliswa, who says, I love cybersecurity. But this time I'm not using a shared key. So I'm not calling her and telling her that I'm using Zama. I'm using Yoliswa's public key. You understand? I'm using Yoliswa's public key to encrypt the message I'm sending. Remember, I just said the public key is known to everyone. So that means I know what Yoliswa's public key is. So I'm encrypting the I love cybersecurity message with her public key. Then the message will then be in the X and the YZ and no one can read it. Then it will come to her. She will decrypt, he or she will decrypt the message with her private key. The private key is only known to her, remember. So she will use a private key and she will decrypt the message and she will know that I sent a message that says, I love cybersecurity. Remember, these are always a pair, public and private. That's why here they say asymmetric encryption uses a public key and private key pair. You understand? So there's always a pair. So every computer has got a pair. It has got a private key that is only known by the computer itself and it will never be shared with anyone. And there's a public key that will be known by everyone. So when you send information using asymmetric, you encrypt the data using the receiver's private key. Sorry, using the receiver's public key, because that's what you know. The receiver will decrypt using their private key because they only know their private key. This one is a bit tricky. I hope I explained it well. Otherwise, you feel free to just go and read a bit on it some more. Okay. Any question on this topic before we go to hashing? Okay. Okay, so there was the last part. Encryption may protect data at rest or in transit. What does that mean? Encryption of data at rest. This means data at rest is the data that is stored on a physical device, such as a server. It may be stored in a database or a storage account, but regardless of where it's stored, encryption of data at rest ensures the data is unreadable without the keys and the secrets needed to decrypt it. If an attacker obtains the hard drive with the encrypted data and didn't have access to the encryption keys, they would be unable to read the data. Okay, then there's encryption for data in transit. So like they said, so there's data that's moving, right? Data in transit is data moving from one location to another, such as across the internet or through a private network. A secure transfer can be handled by several different layers. It could be done by encrypting the data at the application layer before sending it over a network. HTTPS is an example of an encryption in transit. So it's actually a protocol, hypertext transfer protocol, which is secure, which encrypts this traffic in transit. Encrypting data in transit protects it from outside observers and provides a mechanism to transmit data while limiting the risk of exposure. So if you might have things like man in the middle attack, where user A is sending a message to user B, but then somehow in between there's a user C, and then they intercept the traffic. If you are encrypting the data in transit, user C will, in between, will not be able to read the data. Encryption of data in use. Okay, a common use case for encryption for data in use involves securing data in non-persistent storage. So, and such storage will be like your RAM, your CPU. Because remember, when this data is sitting on the hard drive, it may not always be stored on the hard drive while you are using it, because it makes things slow. It slows down the computing power. Some of this data has to move to the RAM, random access memory, or to move to the CPU, where it is cached, so that it's accessible faster and applications can render faster. But what we are saying is that even when this data is in RAM or in CPU cache, it can also be encrypted. This can be achieved through technologies that create an enclave, which is, I think, just think of this as a secured logbox, right? That protects the data and keeps the data encrypted while the CPU processes the data. Then we can go to hashing. Remember, we talk about encryption. Now we are in a different terminology, talking of hashing. Hashing uses an algorithm, right? Remember, with encryption, we talk about keys, right? With hashing, now we talk about algorithms. Uses an algorithm to convert text to a unique fixed length value called a hash. Each time the text is hashed using the same algorithm, the same hash value is produced. The hash can then be used as a unique identifier for its associated data. Hashing is different to encryption in that it does not use keys, as I've mentioned, and the hashed values isn't subsequently decrypted back to the original. I think that's what is important. The hashed value. So we've got the original text. We apply the algorithm, hashing algorithm. Then we get a bunch of zeros and one. But we are not going to be doing reverse hashing to come back to the original, right? And the reason is that hashing is used to store passwords, right? Is used to store passwords. So you will probably have a password file with lots of passwords, but you don't want to keep those passwords as John123, Thomas123, or whatever the case is. Those passwords are hashed with an algorithm, and there are various algorithms out there, which then will hash the password into some unreadable characters, which only when the hashing algorithm is applied, the authentication will take place. So what does it mean? When a user enters their password, the same algorithm that created the stored hash creates a hash of the entered password. This is combined to the stored hash version of the password. If they match, the user has entered their password correctly. Okay, what does that mean? My password is John123. And then I apply the hashing algorithm. When I apply the hashing algorithm, the output is 1001. Now, next time when the person, John, puts their password, the same hashing algorithm will be applied. What then happens is that the first the hashed password, which is already stored in your password file, it will be compared with what John has put in now. If what he has put in now is still 1001 and it matches, it means the password is correct. If the hashing output does not match, that means the password is not correct. So this is more secure than storing plain text password. Remember, as I mentioned, we can't put password as John 123. We need to hash them. But hashing algorithms are also known to hackers because these are also algorithms. Hackers know what sort of typical algorithms people can use to do this. Because of hash functions are deterministic, the same input procedure, the same output, hackers can use to brute force. That is where the term brute force comes in. That means I don't know what the password is. I will just be testing a lot of things and the algorithm will just keep on matching and say, no, it doesn't match, fail, doesn't match, fail. But I can keep on testing so many times and depending on my computing power, there's probability that at some point it will match and I'll get access, right? And at some point you can also use the dictionary attacks. By using hashing of passwords, okay, for every matched hash, they know the actual password. To mitigate these risks, passwords are often salted, right? Salted. This refers to adding a fixed length random to the inputs of the function to create unique hash for the same input. So there are some times where if you are not doing a salting technique, sometimes just by looking at the algorithms, the outputs, and knowing what hashing algorithm could have been used, they can then know what is the original password. So then one of the things that you can use then this technique called salting, which instead of 100, then we can have 100, 11111111111, but actually the password is on the first 4 characters. But we have added some salt with the additional characters. That is what they mean. Okay, so that is hashing. Okay, now the last topic of the day, maybe, I don't know if there's any questions before we move to this last part of the day, where we're gonna go through describing compliance concepts. So, data has now become extremely important than ever to organizations because organizations are really generating huge amounts of profits because of the data. So organizations and institutions and the entire societies generate and rely on data to function on a day-to-day basis. Now, the sheer large scale of data which is generated is increasing. And so is the reliance on it, right? Now, it also then means that the privacy and the protection of the data has become also extremely important now. And organizations and institutions, as they move their data to the service providers, because now, you know, we've seen the on-premise not maybe such a great thing, as they move the data to the service providers, to the clouds, with data centers all over the world, additional consideration now is to come to play, which you as security people will need to provide. So as government agencies or industry groups, there are issued regulations which help to protect and govern the use of data. I mean, I've given an example in this South African context where we have got the Protection of Personal Information Act, right? That is a South African law to govern and protect personal information. So you have to consider this, from personal and financial information to data protection and privacy organizations can be accountable for meeting thousands of regulations to be compliant. So imagine there's a lot of regulations that we need to be compliant to. Okay, listed below are some important concepts and terms that relate to data compliance. This is what you need to know and understand for your exam. Right? Data residency. When it comes to compliance, data residency regulation govern the physical location where data can be stored and how and when it can be transferred, processed, or accessed internationally. These regulations can differ significantly depending on jurisdiction, so depending on which law of the land applies. Okay, so that's the first part. Then there's data sovereignty, which is another important consideration, because data sovereignty, this concept is a concept that the data, particularly personal data, is subject to laws and regulations of countries, regions in which it's physically collected, held, or processed. This can add a layer of complexity when it comes to compliance, because the same piece of data can be collected in one location, stored in another, and processed still in another country, making it subject to laws from different countries. So you can already now see that there's a difference. The data residency, we're really now just looking at that one location where the data is. Now, when you look at sovereignty, data can be stored, collected, processed in many different countries or regions, and there could be different regulations that we need to consider. Then there's data privacy. Providing notice and being transparent about collecting, processing, use, and sharing of personal data are fundamental principles of privacy laws and regulations. So that is why when you find that when organizations at the moment are collecting privacy information, they will inform you that, here's a notice. We are collecting this information. This is how we would want to use this information. Do you acknowledge? Do you accept? They are really trying to adhere to data privacy regulations. So privacy laws previously referred as PII. This is personal information or personal identifiable information, but laws have expanded the definition to any data that is directly linked or indirectly linked back to a person. What is this sort of data? The example of this data could be on your name, your surname, your cell phone number, your email address, because all of this can be tied back to you. So organizations are subject to and must operate consistent with a multitude of laws, regulations, codes of conducts, industry-specific standards and compliance standards governing and data privacy. So as security people, you need to understand what sort of regulations are governing the data that you have. You need to understand where is your data being collected, where it's being processed, where it's being stored, etc. So in most cases, laws and regulations don't define or prescribe specific technologies, right? So they won't tell you, go and use Microsoft Office 365 or go and use this. That organization must use to protect it. They won't tell you what to use to protect the data. They will always leave that to the organization to identify what sort of tools that you will use to apply the appropriate protection measures. Okay, so that is compliance concepts, right? Anything else before I just test your knowledge very quickly? It's not a lot of questions. We're actually by 2 minutes. So, to test your knowledge, I've got some 4 questions for you. Maybe, okay, we've got a question by, can't see your full name, Mampa. Is that correct? Am I saying it correctly? Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can hear loud and clear.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much.
Yes, I can hear loud and clear. Please proceed with your question.
Okay. When talking about the data residency, I need to check. As we all know, South Africa, it has its own mainframe. I need to check with you if, anyhow, to update information on that mainframe. Do they do that in a physical way, or there's a way to update information on that mainframe? Like instead, if it happened that Botswana is using that mainframe to access information for people in Botswana to access information through their server rooms and other stuff, do they come and physically to update the information on the mainframe, or there's a way to do
it? To be quite honest with you, I'm not entirely sure on that, and I think the guiding principles of that would be whether, and then I know in South Africa we're not as restrictive with like other countries. I believe there should be a way, if modification has to be done, it can be done remotely, meaning that a person could be sitting outside the country and modify the data that is sitting in the mainframe in country. However, if we look at countries like Rwanda, Rwanda do not allow cross-border transfer of information. If we use this example in Rwanda, and you need to modify information, you would have to take a flight, go to Rwanda, go and update the information in Rwanda, and then come back. You can't connect remotely and view the information from outside the country, because it is viewed as the information has been transferred outside the country. Even if it's still sitting there, you didn't copy it. You are big, but because you are sitting in South Africa and you are viewing it from South Africa, it violates their rule to say, because Rwanda, they're extremely strict. In South Africa, it's not there yet, with the exception of the medical records. I think in terms of medical records and patients, and I stand to be corrected, that is where there is limitation in that you can't store medical records of patients outside the country. It's not a clear answer, but I think I just gave you maybe some guiding principles to maybe say, if you want to go and research this further, look at what personal, look at what the POPIA Act is saying, and also maybe for some other additional questions, maybe I'll have the project program manager share my email, so that if there are specific security questions, because some of them might not have the answer immediately now, we can also share them via email, and I can always be able to come back to you.
Okay, thanks very much. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Anyone else with a question before we test your knowledge very quickly? Okay, I've got 4 questions here. Maybe we'll just show by the raise of hands here. So the first one is that an organization has deployed a Microsoft 365 application to all employees. Considering the shared responsibility model, who is responsible for their accounts, identities relating to these employees? How many of you say is the organization? By